Welcome back to dinanddaf. This is Elana Stein Hain. And what we're doing today is we are going to talk about the prohibition of murder of both a Jew and a non-Jew. And the reason why I want to talk about the prohibition of murder against both Jews and non-Jews is because in several places, including on Shevuot daf lamed daled, the Gemara indicates, and Mishnah and Sanhedrin did the same, that there is no death penalty for killing a non-Jew. And I want to make sure that we all understand that doesn't mean there is no prohibition to do so. There certainly is. So I want to make a few different points in this shiur. The first point I want to make is the idea that it seems that even though there is a prohibition to kill both a Jew and a non-Jew, there is no death penalty because it seems the death penalty for murder is what's called an intra-Jewish ethic, meaning the same way Jews can't take um, rebate, they can't take interest from each other. The same way we have a higher responsibility of tzedakah to each other, we also have a different punishment for a Jew killing a Jew. That's the first thing I want to look at. Second thing I want to look at is I want to look at the actual prohibition of murder against a non-Jew to see the prohibition. The third thing I want to look at is a really impactful statement in the modern era, one made, and I think it's a shared statement in a way, even though they're separated by 30 years, one made by Rabbanit Racheli Sprecher Frankel, when a bunch of people lynched a 16-year-old Arab boy in as a reprisal attack after Racheli's own son and his two friends were murdered by Palestinian terrorists. And the other was way back in the 1980s after the Sabra and Shatila massacre, where Rav Yehuda Amital, Zichrono Livracha, wrote a teshuva, and I don't even know to whom, wrote a teshuva about the prohibition of murdering non-Jews. So let's go step by step. First things first, I want to talk about this notion of an intra-Jewish ethic of a punishment for a Jew killing a Jew. I'm not saying that this is what I would have written. I'm not saying that this is what the state of Israel would do today. I am just saying that this is the way Halakha was codified. And I think it's significant to see in the Rambam, Hilchot Rotzeach U'Shmirat HaNefesh, where he says, after he had already said in Parak Aleph, which we'll look at in a few minutes, that there's a prohibition to kill any human being, he says in Parak Bet, Halakha Yud, Echad hahoreg et Yisrael, o hahoreg evet Knani, harei zeh neherag alav. If a Jew kills a Jew, or a Jew kills a Canaanite slave, that person gets the death penalty for doing so. V'im harag bishgaga goleh. And if they accidentally murdered, they get galut, they get exile. And then the Rambam goes on to say in Halakha Yud Aleph, Yisrael sheharag gir toshav, eno neherag alav bevitin. A Jew who kills a ger toshav, we would say a Noahide, essentially, a non-Jew who keeps the basic Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, does not get the death penalty. Again, even though the Rambam said in Parak Aleph, Halakha Aleph, which we'll see in a minute, that there's still a violation of Lo tirtzach, thou shalt not murder. So why is there no death penalty? Shneimar, as it says, V'chi yazid ish al re'ehu. The pasuk that it's based on is when a person purposely kills re'ehu. And in Jewish law, re'ehu, like v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, means intra-Jewish. So he says, V'ein tzarech lomar she'enu neherag al hagoy. And of course, if for a ger toshav, someone who keeps Noahide laws, you don't get the death penalty, even though there's a prohibition of murder, you certainly will not get the death penalty for uh, killing somebody who is not Jewish and does not keep the Noahide laws, likely a reference to a pagan. And yet, ve'echad hahoreg et eved acherim, o hahoreg avdo, harizen neherag alav. And yet, at the same time, one who kills the Canaanite servant or of someone else or their own Canaanite servant does get the death penalty for doing so. Why? Sheha'eved kvar kibel alav mitzvot, because that servant has accepted mitzvot upon themselves, vinosaf al nachalat Hashem, and they are part of the Jewish people. In other words, the issue here of the punishment is an intra-Jewish ethic. And in fact, I think that's important to put very much on the back burner, both because in the classic perspective of the Chidushei Haran, who says that one of the reasons we need secular government is to make sure that we are keeping society safe and civil, and therefore someone who is a secular government can enact punishments that are not punishable by Torah, and also because I worry that the focus on the punishment will obscure the fact that there is a prohibition to begin with. So let's look at the prohibition. There are two main opinions as to where the prohibition comes from. And let's start with the pasuk from Shemot Kaf Aleph Yud Daled. V'chi yazid ish al re'ehu lehargo ve'orma. When somebody schemes against re'ehu to kill them with through cunning, me'im mizbechi tikachenu lamut. You should take that person, even if they're holding the altar in the Mishkan, you should take them away from the altar and give them the death penalty. Meaning this pasuk is about the death penalty. It is not about the prohibition to murder. So the Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael on Parshat Mishpatim, on that pasuk, V'chi yazid ish, if a person schemes, ish means lahaviat achirim, even people who are not Jewish who commit murder. Re'ehu, one's fellow, lahavi et hakatan, it actually comes to add even a minor. Also, re'ehu comes to exclude people. Lahotzi et achirim, to exclude others, meaning those who are not Jewish, from the death penalty. Then Isi ben Akiva Omer, Isi ben Akiva says, Kodem matan Torah, before the Torah was given, namely in the aftermath of the Mabul, Shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam damo yishafech, right? Kodem matan Torah, hayinu musarim al shfichut damim. We were warned against murder of any human being. La'achar matan Torah tachat shehuchmaru hukalu. We think that after matan Torah, instead of it being more strict, that you can't kill a non-Jew, it would be less strict. And the Midrash says, Be'emet amru, what they said was, Patur midine basar vadam vidino masur lashamayim. This is something that is considered, killing someone who is not Jewish, is considered punishable by God. So what you have here is a prohibition to kill somebody who is whether Jewish or not Jewish, coming from where? From the 7 mitzvot of Bnei Noach. The Rambam has a different makor, has a different source. Kol horig nefesh ben adam over below ta'aseh. Anyone who kills a human being violates a negative commandment. Shene'emar, as it says, lo tirtzach, thou shalt not kill. So there we have it. It could be from the 7 Noahide laws. It could be from lo tirtzach. There is a prohibition to kill any human being who is not trying to kill you. Now, one thing I have to say is I'm not going to lie and say that I'm not troubled by the idea that there would be no death penalty in the original Halakha for killing a non-Jew. And the reason why I'm troubled by it is because if the idea is that we're trying to deter crime, you should apply the same standards of punishment to both. That said, I'm also not shocked that the rabbis limited the death penalty to Jew against Jew, both because of their general sense of intra-Jewish ethics, also because of their general distaste for the death penalty, and also because it was probably highly unlikely that a Jew was going after a non-Jew to kill them. Probably the reverse was more likely in many situations. That said, I do want to reiterate that I think the beauty of having a secular legal system in addition to a halachic legal system was articulated in the Middle Ages by the Chidushei Haran, again, who says that sometimes we need, and the Rosh said it too before him, sometimes we need a secular legal system to say, halacha doesn't mandate X, but we're going to mandate X because that is what's needed to keep society civil. I do want to say that as much as it's hard to fathom same prohibition, different punishment, one thing that is something that we can consider from a Jewish point of view is that despite the hardships that Jews experienced at the hands of non-Jews during the rabbinic period itself, I do think it's significant that we have as much positive in our rabbinic literature as we do about non-Jews. Certainly, there are negative things said about non-Jews in rabbinic literature. That does not surprise me because there was a lot of persecution experienced by Jews at the hands of non-Jews. And yet, there are also a lot of positives. For example, the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, which is famous. Lefichach nivra adam yechidi, a person was created as an individual, meaning humanity was created in the body of an individual. Lilamedcha shekol hame'abed nefesh achat, to teach you that anyone who destroys a life, ma'aleh alav hakatuv ki'ilu ibed olam maleh. Scripture regards it as though they have destroyed a whole world. Scholars have noted that it is the later versions of this Mishnah where it is changed to Nefesh Achat Mi Yisrael, that we're talking about a Jew. The original version of this Mishnah is believed to be that we are simply talking about Nefesh Achat, any soul. In addition, the Mishnah in Avot, quoting Rabbi Akiva, Hu Haya Omer, Rabbi Akiva would say, Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tselem. Human beings, humanity is beloved that it was created in the image of God. A greater love was actually shown by telling humanity that they were created in God's image. Shenemar, as it says, Ki b'tzelem Elokim asa et ha'adam. God created humanity with tzelem Elokim. And of course, we are referring to the pasuk that is juxtaposed to why you cannot commit murder. Okay? So there we have it. We have our complexity of the intra-Jewish ethic of punishment, the possibility of being able to make up for that gap, and certainly the prohibition and the recognition of humanity of all human beings. Now to come to the contemporary time. It was only in 2014, about 11 years ago, where Rabbanit Racheli Sprecher Frankel, who many people may be familiar with, said something incredibly powerful just, I think it was less than a month after her own son was killed at the hands of Palestinian terrorists. And she responded to the murder of, the price tag murder of the 16-year-old Mohammed Abu Khadir at the hands of Jews by saying, Ein hevdel ben dam ledam. There's no difference between blood and blood. Retzach hu retzach, murder is murder. Yehu halaom v'hagil asher yehu, whatever the nationality or the age. Ein hatzdaka, ein slicha, ve'ein kapara l'retzach kol shehu. There's no justification, no forgiveness, and no atonement for any murder. And this brings me to Rav Yehuda Amital's tshuva, that he wrote in September of 1982. The Sabra and Shatila massacre was a terrible event in which innocent people were murdered by a phalangist Lebanese force, and the Israel Defense Forces played a role in not intervening and allowing these murders to go on at the very least. And Rav Yehuda Amital is responding to someone who seems to not think this is such a problematic thing. And I just want to quote a piece of his tshuva and the Kita'im, the paragraphs from Rav Kook that he cites. Mitoch kotlei michtavcha, I can see from the walls of your letter, meaning between the lines, nir'eh shegam inyan isur harigat goy rafi biadecha. It seems like the issue of the prohibition to kill a non-Jew is something that is a little weak by you. Alkein atzayin kama mekorot, and therefore I am going to mention just a few sources for that prohibition, and he goes on to mention some dozen sources. He also says at the end of his letter, Estapek b'ma shekatavti, I'm going to suffice with what I've already written here. Ve'eni rotze likanes levikuach, I don't want to get into an argument. Kevan sha'amarchak hu gadol, the kevan de iflig says there's clearly a big gap between us, and I'm not going to be able to narrow that gap. Lo astir, I'm not going to hide ki tochen hadvarim b'michtavcha, that the content of what's in your letter, virucham, and their spirit, garmuli agmat nefesh, they caused me great pain. Tsar li shedvarim ke'ele yotzim mitachat yedei talmid chacham. It is hurtful to me, painful to me, that words like this could come from the hand of a Torah scholar. V'ditlim b'yeshirut o ba'akifin b'maran harav zatzal, etc., etc. He says, and that they seem to be they're hung upon either directly or indirectly, meaning you look to other great rabbanim and mention other great rabbanim as the source for your perspective. Again, this letter is posted online and I included the link. It doesn't say who the letter was addressed to, I think for obvious reasons, and it also doesn't include the first person's letter that Rav Amital was responding to. But Rav Amital basically says at the end, Agav, by the way, Kidai la'ayin b'orot HaKodesh, you might want to look at some of Rav Kook, and I want to look at some of Rav Kook with you as a way of ending this short shiur. So Rav Kook in Orot HaKodesh, Chela Gimel, Devar Muchrach, he says, it is necessary, Shipu sheyisagel ha'adam la'atzmo et ha'musar ha'tivya pashut, that a person should have a natural, simple, straightforward sense of morality, b'chol ruchvo v'omko, with it pervasive, right? Pervasively. Ve'et yirat Hashem ve'tamtzit hatahor shel emunah pshuta, a person should have fear of God and a pure concentrate of simple faith, b'chol midoteh b'rochav u'v'omek, again, pervasively. Ve'al gabei shtei hasgulot halalu yivne et kol ma'alot rucho ha'elyonot. And on the basis of these two things, musar tiv'i pashut, simple, right? Simple morality, and yirat Hashem, which is emunah pshuta, on the basis of those two, that's what a person is going to build their spiritual profile, right? Asur liyirat shamayim shetidchak et hamusar hatibi shel adam. It is prohibited for a religiosity, fear of heaven, to push away the natural morality of a human being. Ki az eina od yirat shamayim Torah, because then it is no longer pure fear of heaven. Siman liyirat shamayim tehora. You know what's a sign of pure fear of heaven? Hu kishem musar TV. That's when the natural sense of morality, hanatua b'teva hayashar shel adam, which is instinctive in a person, holech ve'oleh al piha, gets better and better based on having yirat shamayim. B'ma'alot yoter gvohot mima she'omed b'beladeha, and becomes even greater than what it would have been without yirat shamayim. Aval im titzuyar yirat shamayim b'tchuna kazot. But if you have a situation where yirat shamayim is in a situation shebelo hashpa'ata l'chayim, shebelo hashpa'ata l'chayim yoter notim lif'al tov, that a person would be acting better without their yirat shamayim, ulotzi alapol dvarim mo'ilim l'prat u'lklal, and they would do more for the individual and the collective. V'al pi hashpa'ata mitma'ed koach hapolahu, and based on the influence of yirat shamayim, a person does less of that. Yirat shamayim kazot yirat psula. That is invalid yirat shamayim, right? That the fact that a person knows that things are wrong and they know it, their yirat shamayim should not cause them to obfuscate it. They should know it. And that's what Rav Amital wanted this person who seemed not to care about the loss of innocent non-Jewish life to recognize. A second thing that he told him to look at was another beautiful comment by Rav Kook. Ahavat habriot tzricha liot chaya b'lev v'neshama. Love of all creatures, love of all beings, has to be alive in the heart and the soul. Ahavat kol adam biyichud, especially the love of all humans. Ve'avat kol olam kulam, and the love of all of the world. Chafetz iluyam utkumatam ruchanit v'chomrit, or chafetz, I don't know, it's meaning the desire for them to exist and, rise up spiritually and physically. V'hasin'a, and hatred tzricha liot rak al harisha v'hazuama shebaolam. Hatred has to be reserved for evil and zuama and the putrid in the world, of which sadly there is enough to go around. There's enough to hate. Efshar klal lavo lidei rom haruach shel hodu laHashem ki'u v'shmo hodiu ba'amim alilotav. A person cannot come to the high point of their spirit of being able to praise God and say among the nations God's amazing work in this world, below ahava pnimit, without an inner love, me'omkei lev v'nefesh, from the depths of a person's heart and soul, le'etiv la'amim kulam, to want to do good for all nations, l'shaper et kinyanehem, la'asher et chayehem, to be able to help them with their acquisitions, to be able to help them with their lives. Tchuna zohi shemisagelet et rucha de malka mashicha lachol al Yisrael. It is this virtue that brings the spirit of the messianic sovereign to rest upon Israel. Now, I am keenly aware that there are plenty of situations in which hatred is warranted, in which anger is warranted, in which even, sadly, war is warranted. But this whole shiur is bringing us back to the basic recognition of human beings being B'Tselem Elokim, and that we shouldn't forget that, even and maybe especially when there is so much risha, when there is so much wickedness, and there is so much zuhama.